She called him lazy, told him to shut up, and when he asked for just a little respect, she threatened to have him kicked off the flight, all because she thought he was broke. But what this flight attendant didn't know is that the man she just humiliated in row 24 was actually a billionaire and just hours away from buying the entire airline. And the craziest part, she was the reason he made that decision. Now this story isn't just about revenge, it's about assumptions, power, pride, and what happens when the truth shows up at 30,000 feet. If you're into stories that twist like this one, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Next, he boarded the plane with calm steps. His eyes were steady but tired. Wearing faded jeans, a wrinkled t-shirt, and an old backpack, he looked like someone used to being overlooked. No one paid attention, just another face in the crowd. But the flight attendant, she took one look and made up her mind. She saw the unshaven face, the worn-out clothes, and decided he didn't belong. He smiled politely, said good morning. She didn't respond, just pointed toward the back like she was giving orders, not greeting a guest. Row 24, seat C. Economy, I'll seat. He sat down, slid his bag under the seat, and stayed quiet, observing. The flight attendant walked through the aisle with perfect posture, a tight bun, crisp uniform, and an attitude that screamed control. She moved like she was above it all, like the cabin was her stage, and the passengers were interruptions. When she passed him, she saw his bag on the floor and said loud enough for the nearby rows to hear, "Please keep your low-value items secured. The cleaning crew is not responsible for theft or loss." Her words sounded general, but her eyes were locked right on him. He said nothing, just lowered his gaze and stayed still. A few minutes later, the plane began to taxi. Seat belts clicked, voices dropped, the quiet hum of takeoff approaching. He closed his eyes and put in his earbuds. But peace never lasts long. She came back, tapped his seat sharply, and said, "Sir, remove your earbuds. It's required during the safety briefing." He opened his eyes slowly, took out one earbud, and said calmly, "I'm listening. Go ahead." She wasn't satisfied. "Both earbuds, please. We don't want any issues, do we?" He took them out without a word, looked straight ahead, silent. She waited like she expected him to argue, to push back, but he didn't, and somehow that made her more annoyed. As the flight went on, the pattern became clear. She smiled at everyone else, but the moment she reached his row, her face went cold. He asked for a glass of water. She took her time, and when she brought it, she slammed it down just hard enough to make it spill. He wiped the mess with his sleeve, didn't say a word. Around him, people started to notice. A couple nearby exchanged uneasy glances. You could feel the tension building. 2 hours into the flight, she walked down the aisle, passing out satisfaction surveys, handed one to every row, except his. He looked up and asked gently, "Can I fill one out too?" She paused, looked at him like it was ridiculous, and said, "These are for frequent flyers, sir." He replied calmly, "I've flown with this airline for years." She raised her eyebrows and said, "Really? Because you sure don't look like it. Silence. Heavy. Cold." He held her gaze for just a moment, then stood up and began walking toward the front of the plane. She watched him go, assuming he was headed to the bathroom. Let out a smug little laugh like another one offended. But what she didn't know was that this would be the last flight of her career. She thought he was just heading to the bathroom, maybe cooling off from being embarrassed. But he wasn't. Every move he made on that flight was about to change everything. He walked slowly, no rush in his steps. His face was calm, almost unreadable. But if you looked closely, you'd see it wasn't indifference. It was control. When he reached the front of the plane, he stopped at the divider between economy and business and politely asked to speak to the cabin captain. One of the younger attendants hesitated, but something in the man's tone, his presence, made him pause and say, "I'll check for you." Moments later, the captain stepped out. The two men spoke quietly. The man showed him something on his phone. The captain nodded, said nothing, and returned to the cockpit. Then the man sat down in an empty seat in business class. He didn't ask. He didn't wait for permission. And no one said a word. Back in economy, she still hadn't noticed. Still convinced she had the upper hand. Still thinking this was just another poor guy too sensitive to take a little pressure. Until the crew received a message through the internal channel. Head office was requesting an immediate conduct evaluation. Live. during the flight. The other attendants straightened up. Everyone sensed the tension shift. She furrowed her brow. Unusual, yes. Serious, probably not. After all, who cared about someone in row 24? She whispered to a colleague, "What's going on?" He answered, "I think there's someone important on board." She rolled her eyes, then laughed. Important? In economy? With thrift store clothes and a beat-up backpack? She laughed again, loud this time, not noticing how that sound had started to bother people. Two rows behind, a passenger had been recording her. Not just her tone, but the looks, the delays, the passive-aggressive remarks. That video was already circulating through employee group chats, and within 20 minutes, it would hit the inbox of the airline's VP of operations. Meanwhile, in business class, the man stared calmly out the window as if none of this was happening. The young attendant returned, leaned in, and said softly, "Sir, your team confirmed the documents ready. They're just waiting on your signature." He nodded, smiled faintly, and pulled out his phone. He typed just a few words and hit send. No drama. No warning. Just silence and control. Back in economy, the captain tapped her on the shoulder. He asked her to follow him to the front of the plane. This time she didn't even try to look confident. She followed the captain, no longer walking with the same pride. Not after the way he looked at her. Not after the silence. And what she was about to hear would strip her of the last bit of control she thought she had. They entered the front cabin. No noise. No one else around. The captain turned to her with a calm, serious tone. "We received a report with video evidence. The passenger in question is currently under executive review." She froze. Which passenger? He didn't hesitate. The man in seat to foresee. She blinked, tried to smile, tried to explain, but he raised his hand, cutting her off immediately. "Protocol is in effect. Once we land, you'll be placed on immediate leave. Until then, you're expected to remain professional." Her throat went dry. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She walked back to economy, but the mood had shifted. The silence was different now. It wasn't ignorance anymore, it was awareness. The other attendants avoided her. Passengers were watching. Some whispered. Some just stared. Her practiced smile felt heavy, stiff, like it no longer belonged on her face. Meanwhile, up in business class, he sat still, his phone in hand, reading a new message. "Legal has the footage. Meeting confirmed for 3 p.m. with the executive board." He typed back, "Keep it factual. No drama." Far behind him, the video recorded by the passenger finally reached its last destination. A well-known YouTuber who exposes corporate abuse posted it with the caption, "Flight attendant mocks man for looking poor, but she has no idea who he really is." Within an hour, over 70,000 views. Comments pouring in, people calling for accountability, for justice for her firing. She had no idea. No clue her name was already trending. No clue what was waiting when that door opened. Until the captain got another message. This one private. From the board. The man in 24C, he's not just any passenger. He's the lead investor in final talks to buy a majority share of this airline. And this flight was part of a silent audit. At that moment, everything shifted. And the flight that started with arrogance was about to land in humiliation. That's when she finally understood something was slipping out of her hands. But what she didn't know was that in just 10 minutes, everything she thought she controlled would be gone. The plane was still taxiing when phones started buzzing non-stop. Notifications, shares, alerts. And one video in particular was exploding online. Passengers on board were already recognizing her. The same tone, the same attitude, the same cold delivery. And now millions were watching it unfold. She felt the stares. Every glance pierced through her pristine uniform. But she kept her eyes down, pretending not to notice. In business class, he stayed quiet, his phone resting on his lap, buzzing every few seconds. Social media reports, screenshots of comment sections, even private messages from corporate leaders, including one from a rival airline's CEO. "If you ever want to talk, our door is open." The video had passed 100,000 views in less than 10 minutes. The company's PR team tried to react, but it was too late. Her name was trending #1 in the country. Onboard passengers started filming. Some narrated what was happening, others just quietly recorded her frozen in place, lost, looking for something to hold onto. The captain pulled her aside, told her, For the safety of everyone, she should remain in the rear of the aircraft until the doors opened. She didn't argue. She didn't have the strength. Her fellow crew members avoided eye contact. No one offered support. No one spoke. In the silence between flight announcements, she heard it all, the dings, the whispers. The phone's buzzing. That's her, someone said. She's the one in the video. Meanwhile, up front, he sat by the window, still and composed. But this time he wasn't just calm. He was in control. He knew exactly what to do, how to move, what to say, and when to strike. And in those 10 minutes, without saying a single word, he made more noise than she ever could. Then the plane stopped. The doors hadn't even opened yet when a voice came through the intercom, clear and unexpected. A voice she never imagined she'd hear on this flight. The voice of the airline's new owner. His voice came through the speakers, but it wasn't what he said that stunned the passengers. It was who he was, and what he did in the minutes that followed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Thomas Reed speaking. Silence. Some passengers looked at each other in confusion. Others froze. Because yes, that name was familiar. I'm one of the lead investors in this airline, and as part of a confidential internal audit, I've been on this flight to observe crew performance and conduct. The flight attendant stopped breathing. She looked toward the front, then at her colleagues. None of them met her eyes. Unfortunately, I've witnessed behavior today that goes completely against the values this company claims to uphold. Every word landed like a hammer. And I want all of you to know that immediate changes are being implemented. No one moved. No one spoke. Before we begin deplaning, the crew will be officially notified of disciplinary actions and structural changes that are already in progress. Her legs felt weak. That envelope she'd received earlier now made perfect, terrifying sense. She tried to hold back tears, but the pressure had broken her. Thomas turned off the mic and stood up. Every eye followed him. He was no longer the man with the old backpack, but the one who now owned the sky above them. Two company officials stood waiting by the aircraft door. Different uniforms, straight postures. They nodded respectfully at Thomas. Passengers slowly started gathering their belongings, but no one dared approach him. They simply watched with awe and quiet respect. One woman approached, nervously. "Dotmer, Reed, what you did was brave." He gave her a calm smile. "That wasn't bravery. That was justice." In the back of the plane, the flight attendant sat frozen, her badge in her lap, hands shaking. Then the intercom crackled again. This time, it was the company's head of operations. The voice was cold and clear. "Effective immediately, terminate the flight attendant involved. All remaining crew members are now under full review." To everyone watching, she looked broken, shaken, ruined. But the truth, this wasn't the first time she'd crossed a line. It was just the first time she got caught. Long before this flight, before the cameras, before the trending hashtags, there were whispers. Passengers who filed quiet complaints. Crew members who warned each other. Supervisors who pulled her aside with one last conversation, one more reminder. But she always walked away untouched, clean, smiling. She had the look. She had the voice. She knew exactly how to play the system. All charm with management, all power with those beneath her. There had been a woman, an older passenger, who once reported her for humiliating her son, a teen on the autism spectrum. The complaint was buried. The report disappeared. And the next flight, she was promoted to lead. Another time, a younger co-worker asked to switch shifts. He said working with her gave him anxiety. Her response? "Maybe you're just not built for this job." When word started spreading after this flight, dozens of former colleagues came forward. Not just one story, but patterns. Years of arrogance buried behind a perfect smile and a polished tone. Back at headquarters, HR went from reviewing one incident to opening a full investigation. And slowly, everything she'd tried to hide started unraveling. People stopped seeing her as the victim of a bad day and started seeing her for who she really was. Not misunderstood, not under pressure, but entitled and dangerous. At home, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Media, reporters, even former friends asking, "Is it true?" She didn't answer. She sat on the floor, still in uniform, watching herself on the screen, not as a professional, but as a warning. Meanwhile, Thomas sat in a quiet conference room, a final contract in front of him, his pen in hand. The airline was his now. But for him, this wasn't about ownership. It was about sending a message. Everyone now knew who he was, but they didn't know where he came from, or what it took for a boy from nowhere to become the man who now owned the skies. Thomas Reed didn't grow up in boardrooms. He grew up in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in a forgotten corner of Newark. His mother worked 2 jobs. His father was gone before he turned 5. And by the time he was 12, he already knew how to fix a washing machine, how to read bank statements, and how to keep quiet in rooms that didn't want him there. He was the kid no one expected anything from. Not the teachers, not the neighbors, not even some of his own family. He spoke quietly, observed everything, and remembered everything. In college, he worked nights cleaning office buildings and days in class. He didn't party, didn't date, didn't sleep much either. He graduated top of his class, but even then, when he showed up for job interviews in his best suit, they looked past him. Some thought he was the driver. Others assumed he was applying for a janitorial position. So he stopped trying to impress them and started building his own thing. One investment, one risk, one long night at a time. He studied broken companies, found where others quit, and made them profitable again. By 38, he'd rescued 5 major brands from bankruptcy, quietly. No spotlight, no press. Because Thomas never wanted fame. He wanted control. The kind of control that doesn't come from being loud, but from being the last person in the room with the power to say yes or no. So when he boarded that flight with a worn backpack and faded jeans, he wasn't trying to prove anything. He was testing a culture, a system, a company he was weeks away from acquiring. And she failed the test in front of everyone. Not because he looked poor, but because she assumed he had no value. What she didn't realize was that men like him don't need to raise their voice to shake the ground beneath you. And now he had everything he needed. The story, the proof, the company. But he wasn't finished, not yet. The flight was over, but the impact had just begun. This wasn't just about one woman or one mistake. It was about a system finally being exposed. The video didn't slow down. It exploded. Within 12 hours, news outlets across the country were airing the footage. Not just YouTubers, but national anchors, morning shows, even primetime specials. The headline: Billionaire humiliated on his own flight silently buys the airline. The footage was everywhere. The moment she snapped, the moment he stayed quiet, the walk to the front of the plane. It became a symbol of everything people were tired of. Arrogance, abuse, prejudice masked as professionalism. Thousands flooded the airline's social media. Demands for accountability, for deeper investigations, for change. The company released a statement calling the incident unacceptable and confirming the sale to Thomas Reed. But he said nothing. No interviews, no public appearances. He let the silence speak for him. Meanwhile, the woman at the center of it all was being torn apart online. Some defended her. Most didn't. Former employees came forward. Customers. Even a pilot who once filed a complaint that mysteriously vanished. The system that once protected her was collapsing. And Thomas? He was preparing for something bigger. Behind closed doors, he was rewriting the company's internal policy, redesigning training protocols, restructuring management. Because to him, this wasn't about revenge. It was about never letting this happen again. He didn't want a headline. He wanted a shift, and he was about to deliver one. At dawn, a press conference was announced. No statement, no details, just one line on the screen. Thomas Reed will speak. Everyone was waiting, not just for answers but for closure, for someone to say what needed to be said. And when Thomas finally stepped up, he didn't hold back. The press conference room was packed. Reporters, cameras, lights. But when Thomas Reed walked in, there was no grand entrance, no entourage, just him. In a black sweater, jeans, and that same calm silence. He stood behind the podium, looked across the room, and paused. Then he spoke. I wasn't planning to speak. I never wanted to be the center of this. But the moment stopped being about me a long time ago. He looked down for a second, then continued. We live in a world where people are judged before they speak, before they sit down, sometimes before they even breathe. And on that flight, I wasn't treated poorly because I did something wrong. I was treated poorly because someone thought I had nothing to offer. That's the danger of assumptions. They cost people dignity. They cost companies their future. And sometimes they cost lives. I didn't buy this airline for power. I bought it to change how people are seen before they're heard. He thanked the team, thanked the passengers who spoke up, and then walked off stage without taking a single question. And just like that, it was over. The woman at the center of the scandal quietly resigned. No statement, no farewell. Some say she moved away. Others say she's still fighting her version of the story. But Thomas never looked back. Instead, he launched a new internal campaign called Every Seat Matters. New training, new leadership, a full culture reset starting from the bottom. And months later, he took one more flight in the same seat to foresee. This time, a young flight attendant greeted him with a smile, offered him a drink, and asked if he needed anything. He smiled back and said, "Just respect. That's all anyone ever needs." And maybe that's the lesson. You never really know who's sitting next to you. You never really know what someone carries, what they've built, or what they've survived. So the next time you look at someone and think they don't belong, ask yourself, who made you the one to decide? If this story made you think, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal what's hiding beneath the surface. And if you want another twist you won't see coming, watch the video right here.